Judy Sarden here, Classical School at Home. I wanted to give you a brief talk about my thoughts on standardized testing. I've already written a blog post about how I didn't think that it was necessary, or I was kind of on the fence. I wasn't really sure. My mom has been nagging me a lot for a long time to go ahead and get the kids tested. She's a career educator, 35 years, and she's a believer in standardized testing. I resisted for a long time, but back in January, I did go ahead and order from Seton Testing their Terra Nova test, which I think is a California Achievement test, the 6th version of it. And I can say that I'm really happy that I did go ahead and have the kids tested. The thing that I liked about Seton is I could do the testing myself. So I think their requirement is that you have a degree, or if you don't, then they may have an extra requirement. But as long as you have at least a bachelor's degree, you can administer the test to your kids yourself. So what I did was order the test. I ordered the kindergarten test for my child who had just turned 5 about a week before, and I ordered the first grade test for my child who was 6, and we were doing first grade. So we kind of did this in the middle of the school year, so it was an end of year type of test. So I expected, for example, my son, my oldest, wouldn't know much. He would maybe know half of the math that was on there, but I thought it would be a good baseline to establish exactly where everybody was. The testing results were eye-opening. First, my son, my oldest child, he's very, very bright, and I expected him to blow the test out of the water, honestly. I mean, all of our kids are brilliant, right? Well, he didn't. In fact, I sat there while administering the test and watched him as we were going over the reading portion. There were reading passages that I knew that he could read. He either took too long when he found out he was going to be timed. He locked up. But suffice it to say, I sat there and watched him leave 2 pages of questions just not answered. If there was any reading involved, he would choke up, and I would just sit there and watch him mark answers that I knew that he knew the answer to, and he would just mark them wrong. He would just mark anything to get through the test. That was the language portion. The math, he scored as expected. He scored almost 100% on the math stuff that we had covered so far, and was clueless like on the double-digit addition and subtraction because we hadn't gotten to that. So he missed those. He tried, but he missed those. I expected that. Then science and social studies. What I did was I would read the question, and then the answer he'd have to choose, but all the answers were represented by pictures. And since he didn't have to read anything, he did blow those sections out of the water. So for science and social studies, he scored 4th and 5th grade, and this is again a child who's middle of 1st grade. So he scored 4th and 5th grade level on the portions where he didn't have to read. He scored exactly where I expected him to score for math, and on the reading and vocabulary sections, he was all over the place. He ended up overall scoring 2nd grade 5 months. So he ended up scoring a full year ahead of where he was, but I was totally expecting him to do better than that. One of the things that we do with him, because he's not a very good writer, physically, his fine motor skills are just not that great. So I don't make him do a lot of physical writing, so we do a lot of oral back and forth. I do oral testing as opposed to doing a physical test. So I'm a lawyer, and I hated the Socratic method, but I find that it's actually quite effective. So I tend to use that in my homeschool, whereby I will put the information out there, and then I will ask the children a series of questions and make them connect the dots on their own, or keep questioning them so that they can at least find the logic and figure things out on their own. So we do a lot of that. We were doing a lot of that, and so I knew exactly what he knew, and I knew that what he knew wasn't being reflected by his answers on the test. My daughter, who had just turned 5, a week before she was administered the kindergarten test, blew it out of the water. She scored first grade in everything. There were only 2, maybe 3 sections, but she scored first grade plus on all of those, reading, math, and then language arts. And the difference between my 2 kids is my daughter loves workbooks. And as I have been working with my son and really putting in a lot of time with him, she's the younger child. I would give her workbooks, I would give her stuff where she would have to sit there and figure it out. And I found, surprisingly, that her love of workbooks and all things fill in the blank and bubble in, I think that's what really put her over the edge on the test. So she scored, the scores were exactly the opposite of what I was expecting. I was expecting my daughter to struggle. I was expecting my son, my oldest, to blow the entire test out of the water, and it was just totally opposite. So I learned a couple of things from that. Standardized tests are here to stay, and as much as homeschool families may avoid or even abhor the thought of a standardized test, I found it useful since I was able to administer it. I was able to see exactly what my children were struggling with. I was able to then, after the test, change actually the way that the way I ran my homeschool. So now with my son, I have him do a lot more of reading his own instructions, figuring out what he's supposed to do, and then he has to physically do it. So yes, we are doing more workbooks. We're still using our Socratic and inquiry-based methods, but he clearly needed that. He clearly needed to have to read instructions on his own, and I never would have known that if I had not administered that test. That was a biggie for him, and we struggled with it during the spring, but now here we are, July or August, and he's doing a lot better. He can go and actually read all for his math. He does his own reading of the instructions, and then he does it himself. And we've come a long way since January, but again, totally eye-opening with the standardized test. With my daughter, there really wasn't much to learn except that let her continue to do her worksheets. We do a lot of inquiry-based as well. She should be starting kindergarten this August, but all of her books are now first grade, and so she's doing really well. But because we do the inquiry based, she's very good because she is a master of worksheets. She can fake them. That's one thing that I have learned about her. She can fake. She has figured out what the answer should be, and she's able to produce that answer without really understanding the material. And so I know that if she was in school, she would be breezing by, and at some point, probably 4th or 5th grade, she'd hit a wall because she really wouldn't understand everything. So the standardized test told me about her. Let her continue to do her worksheets because it's a valuable skill that she has, being able to read instructions and do her own thing. But I know that I need to continue with inquiry based because oftentimes her answers don't reflect her true understanding. Somehow she was able to score 2nd grade reading level on that standardized test, and I know that she was not in January reading on a 2nd grade level. She just wasn't. She couldn't read any of the books my son was reading, so somehow she was able to score a 2nd grade level on this standardized test. It's really bizarre. Anyway, so I would say if you're on the fence about doing standardized tests, go ahead and do it. It's not going to hurt. It cost $120 for me to do the 2 kids, and that's because I also ordered the practice test, which was a joke. If they can do a workbook sheet, they can do the standardized test. So if you're thinking about ordering the practice book, I would say it's not worth it. I'm certainly not going to order them again. But if you're thinking about it, I would say if you've got the $100, go ahead and do it, and see if you learn anything about your kids and about their learning. It's really helped us in our homeschool, and I really feel that without it, I would have ended up, we have to have our kids tested in Georgia in 3rd grade, and I think that I would have been open for a rude awakening in 3rd grade with my son if I hadn't gone ahead and done the testing now, and that way I could implement some interventions so that when the test counts, he'll be ready. And obviously we don't teach to the test. That doesn't mean I'm teaching to the test, but there are just some test-taking skills that I can incorporate, some soft skills that I can incorporate into our homeschool that will make him better prepared to perform on a standardized test. Also, the issue of timing. If we had taken the Stanford Achievement Test, I don't think there's a timing component. We did take the Terra Nova. There is a timing component. Some tests will be timed, some tests won't. We will probably end up taking the Stanford Achievement Test this next year. It is not timed, but I think every other year I will do the time test just for the practice. So anyway, I hope that this helped, and if you have any questions, go to www.classicalschoolatHome and shoot me a comment, or send me a comment here on YouTube.